Are you curious about financial literacy? Then take a look at Professor Anthony Rivecchio's new program on Parrot TV. It's called Financial Focus University. This is an excellent program to learn about questions related to your own finances post-COVID, and how you can manage your money, how you can work with your tax situation. And this is an excellent and informative discussion of financial literacy. With Professor Anthony Rivecchio, your financial problems will be solved at Parrot TV with Financial Focus University. World Inkers Monthly magazine is a fine source for your literary interests. It's an all-source magazine with poetry, prose, and essays and articles, as well as interviews. It's all full-color art and photography from a variety of voices and artists. You will find this magazine entertaining. This is an all-purpose readership, and we are looking for new voices. This sleek, full-color edition of World Inkers Monthly magazine will be something pleasant for your eyes as well as for your mind. And we're looking for authors for one book promotion in the magazine. If you're a business, we want to promote your business. You may submit your book reviews, your academic or non-academic articles on the humanities and the arts, as well as your literary writing and creative output to publication.worldinkers@gmail.com. World Inkers Monthly magazine does not spare any ink. Keep inking for World Inkers Monthly magazine.
Cover that. Hello, welcome to Foreign Policy Review. Our host, Dustin Pickering, will not be with us today. I'm CARLO Parcelli, and we have a guest, Billy Bob, with us. And I guess our topic today will be, well, what do you think? Maybe billiards? Let's do Ukraine. Let's do Ukraine just for a laugh. And let me toss it over to Billy Bob and get his view on the events of the last couple of weeks and how he would break them down for us. Billy Bob?
Thank you very much, Carlo. Thanks for having me back on. The few points about Ukraine that are most interesting to me is, the media spin, the Western media spin on the one hand, and then, the reality of the situation on the other. There's so much to discuss regarding Ukraine. I mean, it's a big topic. To summarize, though, we definitely have a hot war going on. There's a military aspect to it, and there's also a propaganda aspect and a financial aspect. So, these are the three different wars playing out. And, as far as the military one is concerned, I think the media is doing a disservice to Western viewers. It's blatant war propaganda, nonstop, 24/7, no dissenting opinions, and it's everybody's all on the same page, saying the same false narrative. I mean, it's what you expect. It's typical. But I think what people ought to appreciate is Russia's approach here, what Russia is trying to do regarding sparing innocent civilians, not destroying infrastructure and things that are going to be necessary for a post NATO Ukraine. So that's one of the important things. They're sacrificing their own troops, in order to save Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian infrastructure. And then you have the financial war that is just beginning to start right now. Time will tell how the anti-imperialist bloc can respond to the efforts of the West to crush them economically. But we can talk more about that. We can talk about the military aspect or the propaganda aspect. But let me throw it back to you and just ask you, where where you'd like to take this discussion.
Well, I just want to make a couple of observations. Let me just get rid of this. I like to talk a little bit about the propaganda aspect of it. I don't think the racist element and I don't think the Nazi element is getting the coverage it deserves in the Western press, and on so many fronts. For example, I attempted to watch the John Oliver show, just for a little background. It's a popular TV show on HBO, and his summation of what was going on, left out the Maidan coup of 2014, literally called Putin a liar for suggesting that there were Nazis involved in the Ukrainian power structure, even though the Azov Battalion it's the only neo-Nazi organization that's formally in a country's military. It's part of the Ukraine military, and these are the people. And then he completely ignored the Donbass, and it's the Azov Battalion that's been bombing and strafing and sniping the Donbass for 8 years, killing 14,000 people have died there. 81.4% have been Russian-speaking people living in the Donbass killed by Nazis. So I think that's a real embarrassment for the United States, because I think of all my uncles and my father to a certain degree who fought against the Nazis. Some of them literally with Patton, they were on the ground, they were in the Blitz, and what the Nazis did. So I was kibitzing with a bunch of ordinary folks the other day, and I mentioned the fact that 27 million Soviets, that is Russians, were killed by the Nazis in the Great Patriotic War in World War II. And this woman, and she's like in her 50s, maybe even older, she thought I was lying. She thought I was making it up. So that comes back to the propaganda thing. How hard is it to propagandize idiots, people who are that stupid? I also put something up on my Facebook page, and another woman came back who obviously just Googled something very quickly, and she told me that the Azov Battalion was communist. You go, what do you do with that? So the propaganda arm of this is so easy. So Rosalie and I this morning, to prep a little more, we were watching the Western press talk to pitch questions at Lavrov. And some of the questions were just as stupid as the people I was talking to. Stephanopoulos, that idiot, he asked Lavrov, well, how can there be anti-Semitism in Ukraine if Zelensky, the president, is Jewish? Well, that's pretty easy. The reason the Minsk Accords have been abrogated is because even though Zelensky and Poroshenko before him and Yanukovych before him ran on peace initiatives and won the elections on peace initiatives, the Nazis, the right sector, they want the people who were behind the Maidan coup of 2014 won't allow him to accept peace. And what's very interesting to me, and I'll leave it off at this after I express this, is that just about 2 weeks ago, the standard was that the United States, along with the far right in Ukraine, would not allow Zelensky to sue for peace, because And of course, it's in their interest not to have him sue for peace. They're selling weapons like crazy. They got the Ukrainians dying for them, essentially, in Europe, and they're weakening Europe in a profound way by blocking, for example, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So it works in their favor. But now that there's been this association with the Nazis, now I'm reading here and there and here and there. Oh, well, the United States was pressing Zelensky to accept the Minsk Accords, and they just couldn't convince him to do it. What horse shit! What horse shit! Well, that's one of the things I wanted to start off with. I've got other things, but I'm going to pitch it back to you. Let you fly with it.
Okay. Everything that you said was exactly spot on. I think the NATO is anxious to, they've really navigated they've moved things to where we're at a place where, NATO's more than happy to fight Russia down to the last Ukrainian. And they're more than happy to have, a tremendous bloodbath where, again, the U.S. isn't sacrificing anything. All the sacrifices are being made by Ukraine and by Europe. And I mean, this is just perfect for, the U.S. capitalist class and even the capitalist class in Europe, because they're not going to be suffering. It's going to be the working class that suffers. But they've really, strategically, NATO has won by forcing, Russia to respond militarily. That was a strategic victory for the West, no doubt about it. And now they're going to leverage their control over the propaganda apparatus, to spin the narrative and to win their war against Russia. But I think even though Russia was forced and they really had no other options, this was the best option for Russia. I think again, the anti-imperialist bloc is powerful, and I think it remains to be seen how the alliance between Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, a lot of resource-rich countries are able to respond, and time will tell. But it's the propaganda apparatus. It's a huge problem. We have platforms like this that can do very very little, and then they have this huge colossal apparatus. But let me give it back to you, and we can.
Yeah, I want to elaborate on that because that's absolutely right. I thought I'm a very naive person. I thought the Gulf of Tonkin would be an abject lesson, then Iran Contra, and then WMD, which is fairly recent, and of course my buddies over there at Gray Zone, they want to push. Well, Russiagate was absurd, but listen, Russiagate's far too subtle for the American mind. It doesn't grasp the existential nature of SpongeBob SquarePants yet. That's where the American mind is. But about the fact that it was all set up, it's I live in the Washington D.C. area, and I did a little bit of research. Now I know that it's very wealthy around here. Not particularly where I live. I live in the African American county, Prince George's County. We're primarily African American, second Hispanic, and then there's white people like me. And but I did a little bit of research of the richest 11 counties in the United States, and there are 4,265 counties in the United States. Of the 11 richest counties in the United States, eight are around Washington, D.C. because of the military-industrial complex. Six are in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and 2 are in Maryland. And the medium income would give people living in the heartland in the red states, a heart attack. A heart attack. Housing prices in Northern Virginia, it's not unusual to see a 3 or 4 bedroom house sell for $2 or $3 million. Okay, I mean, I got stats here, but let's put the stats behind. That's where the money is, and that's why they wanted, one of the reasons they wanted to goad Russia into some kind of conflict in Eastern Europe, and it has nothing. It has to do with greed, as one person so eloquently put it on Facebook. Millions of people are going to die, or thousands of people are going to die, so that 400 people in Northern Virginia can remodel their bathrooms. That's the truth. So if these people are willing to kill women and children willy-nilly to remodel their bathroom, and that's literally what it's about. They have anybody want to come here, I'll show them. You know, they have malls, and my wife points out these are the discount malls where they sell T-shirts for $98. They have Lamborghini dealerships, car dealers, Lamborghini car dealerships where the CIA people live. So it's like, that's the deal. It comes down to money and greed. So what's driving everything behind this is the kind of power that they feel accrues with naked financial aggression. So that's an element that I don't think that the American people adequately understand, just how much the military-industrial complex influences what's going on foreign policy here. I mean, they write the policy. So I just wanted to add that dimension. I'm going to pitch it back to you. I don't if you might have something to add to it. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so my basic worldview, you have, the West is really run by a capitalist dictatorship, and what the fundamental divisions within society are based on class, and so it's like the ownership class, the capitalist class, they have all the wealth and all the power. They own the platforms of mass communication. They own the politicians, and they implement policies that benefit the capitalist class. And they're not so much concerned about the working class. And I think this is, different from what you have in other countries. And in even other countries that aren't necessarily socialist, you at least have a government in power that cares about, the vast majority, and actually cares about the interests of the working class. And they actually pursue, things like peace, mutual prosperity, and they want those kinds of things. And that's entirely different from, Western imperialism, which we've seen since the end of World War II, where, they've just been about achieving total global hegemony and full spectrum dominance, in the economic sphere, the military sphere, the political sphere, the informational sphere. So, it's no surprise that money gets consolidated to, the capital and the seat of, where power controls Western imperialism, which is DC. And I mean, your stats, prove that to be true. Again, I think that's what is fundamentally happening right now is you're seeing the beginning of the world, start to have a real divergence between, Western imperialism and the anti-imperialist bloc. So, before last week, there wasn't a hot war. The war was propaganda. There has been a decades-long propaganda war against Russia, against China. There's been financial wars with sanctions, but there wasn't a hot war. And so I'm not sure there's any going back. I think things are going to accelerate, and we're going to see more clearly in the next few weeks and months this huge divergence. And I think the West is going to force China to take a side, but they're also constrained because they don't want to push Russia and China together. But Russia and China, of course, they know very well what's going on, and they're not going to be split by the West by any means. It's just a matter of how long China can maintain the status quo before how the media and how our government is treating Russia starts treating China in exactly the same way.
Yeah. And just briefly on China and Russia, Russia is now the largest producer of wheat in the world, and China has bought an enormous amount of wheat. This talk of banning Russia access to SWIFT. Well, they're not going to ban oil and wheat. They can't do it because Europe would starve. Europe would freeze. Okay, I've got that out of the way. But I want to say another thing about the U.S. military-industrial complex and the way taxpayers' money is spent in general in the U.S. And it's just a system of bribery and extortion. And this is what I mean by that. It's bribery because the military-industrial complex has people with getting jobs in every facet of that complex in all 50 states. There are no exceptions. Every state has a military-industrial component. Their universities, their factories, everything. Every state is covered. That's the bribe. First, you bribe the congressmen from those states, the senators from those states, and then they put the jobs in their states where you have the workers who earn these rather generally pretty good incomes, and they put the incomes back into the community, and it all trickles down. It's all that bribe. And the extortion part of it is, if you don't go along with it, we're going to take it out of your state, and you won't have those jobs, and you won't have those incomes for the local restaurant where all the workers go to eat their lunch. And you won't have the filling stations where they fill their cars with gasoline. You won't have that. So it's bribery and extortion. That's the whole concept of American policy. It's just on the one hand, we'll bribe everybody so they're totally dependent on us. And then if you don't do what we say, if you raise up, if you know something, if you act, and you try to act on it, we will extort you by taking away your ways of earning a living, your ways of feeding your families, your whole notion of well-being. And that's the whole system. And it's really what it is the capitalist system. And that's the way it's set up here. So people don't feel the need to know anything about the world. And what's infuriating to me is there's people like me who spend a fair amount of time trying to understand what's going on. When I try to tell them what's going on, notwithstanding what their position is, I mean, I know they're comfortable. I know they're relatively comfortable to somebody living in, somebody living in an impoverished, what used to be called third world country. But they should at least allow me to have the space to express what I've taken the time to learn, and they haven't. And that I find to be really a real kind of character flaw in Americans that I find exists nowhere else. Nowhere else. So I'll toss it back to you. I just wanted to get that out. But
Yeah, and that gets back to the censorship and the one-sided narratives that that characterize the propaganda apparatus. Um, it's it's very effective. China, of course, engages in censorship. They regulate their media. They regulate speech. But I think the U.S. system is way more effective, and it's far more advanced. It's a far more advanced form of censorship, where the government can say, "Hey, we have plausible deniability," but guess what? The government is owned by the same people that own the media. It's all a private entity. And like you said, they're gangsters. I mean, it's mafia kind of approach to governance. And they can say, hey, it's not government that's forcing free speech, and that's what we have a problem with. But again, when the government is controlled by the exact same people that own the media, they're gonna it's like who cares if the government's doing it or if it's a private corporation? It's still a very, very, very effective form of censorship and media regulation. And so I think China regulates their media in the interest of the working class, whereas of course in the West the media is regulated in the interests of the capitalist class. And again, that whole fundamental idea of class differences is not even discussed or talked about, and it's been erased out of the minds of the Western public. Like, they don't even think in terms of class, when it's actually the most fundamental aspect of why things are as they are. So what regarding Ukraine, what are your thoughts on on the near term future, the long term future? Like, how do you see? I'm just curious of your perspective, how you see things playing out. And you can talk about economically, militarily. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I just want to say one more thing about propaganda in the U.S., and that is, somewhere along the line, free speech has come to mean I don't have to know anything. I don't have to read anything. My opinion matters just as much as yours. It doesn't matter how much you read or how much you know. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your experience is. It doesn't matter. I can blow it out my ass, and you have to give that equal weight. That's part of the propaganda system. That's just genius. That's Edward Bernays in his 1928 book, Propaganda. Basically, he lays that out. So anybody who wants to read it should read it. I also highly recommend another book just from that time by Major General Smedley Butler, War is a Racket. But as regard your question, I've been following a couple of guys. There's this Russell Bentley who's on the ground in Donbass, and he's married to a Russian-speaking Ukraine. He has a Russian passport, and they're living in Ukraine. They're living in the Donbass, and they've been living under the shelling now for 8 years. And he gives an on-the-ground summation of what's going on, and he gives his opinion about what's going on. Now he has a great respect for Scott Ritter, who people who know a little bit about history will remember he was one of the weapons inspectors who went into Iraq and basically said, there's no WMD here. And so he was pilloried by the Western press. He was right. He was pilloried by the Western government, pilloried by the Western press, but he's right. But his take is, and I have to agree with it. First of all, he says the war is over in Ukraine. It's just a matter now of the Russians effecting the advanced elements of strategic elements of their whatever you want to call incursion. Liberation is what Russell Bentley calls it. Let's call it liberation, of the liberation of Ukraine. So he says, what's going to happen now? And I have no reason to doubt Scott. I mean, he's a better strategic thinker than I am, and Russell and I agree on that. But he says that they're, like you said at the beginning, Russia's trying to minimize damage to infrastructure and minimize the number of people who are killed. They're basically surrounding the cities and strangling them. They initially went in where the CIA and the Ukrainian Nazis had their training camp for international jihadists and international Nazis and terrorists around the world, and they took that out first, which was a good plan. And so now the plan is to establish a neutral or Russian-leaning government in Ukraine, and to pull back Russian troops to, if not behind the Russian boundary lines, close to the Russian boundary lines, to keep an eye on things, to as much as possible prevent NATO and the United States and the military-industrial complex of the West for shipping more arms into Ukraine to foment a civil war, and to try to get some agreement on the terms, like that Ukraine will be declared a neutral country, and that Donetsk and Lugansk will be declared independent republics, that like the Minsk Accords had written in it, and which the fucking goddamn United States signed on to. If you didn't agree with it, why the fuck did you sign on to it? So, and that goes for France and Germany too. So, I hope that notion, I hope that Scott Ritter's vision, I should say, for what's going to happen in the next few weeks or months pans out. It's a relatively benign view of what's going to happen, but he insists, and he would know far better than I, that basically the fighting's over. Obviously, this notion that the population in Kiev is going to fight to the last, the last secretary and the last Xerox copier, and the last lawyer is just bullshit. It's like, look at this hand. I mean, can you imagine how cynical you have to be? And this is on Zelensky too. How cynical you have to be to hand out AK automatic rifles to people who don't know how to use them, and already a huge black market has formed where you're giving people a $1,500 gun, $1,500 in American dollars, and Ukraine is the poorest country in Europe, the poorest. That's like a third of their annual income, $1,500. So they're going to go in the black market, and the black marketeers, the gangs and the hoodlums and the thugs, they're going to offer them a couple of $100, $300. That's like gold there. That's like, and when did they become so poor? They became poor after 2014, after the U.S.-led Nazi coup of 2014. Their economy plummeted. And I warned them about this 30 years ago when I was doing a blog. I kept writing them to things that I hope got there, saying, look, if you go with the U.S., they'll fuck you in the ass, because that's their business. Their business is sodomizing countries. Look at Haiti, for example. They want to turn you into Haiti, and they just go after Haiti for revenge and racism. That's the only reason they go after Haiti. And they'll do the same thing to you. And sure enough, their economy is in the toilet now.
Yeah.
So
they're more than happy.
Guns that could make a few bucks by selling them, or as Russell Bentley said, he's heard rumors that people are settling personal personal gripes with their neighbors using the guns. So it's like, anyway, I'm going to leave it off there and let you chime back in.
The strategy, from the West and what Zelensky is implementing by, handing all these weapons out is not to win the war against Russia or to, save his government. It's about sacrificing Ukraine and making, Ukraine, they're going to be they're being sacrificed in the West's effort to, try and get regime change in Russia, hoping to balkanize Russia. But yeah, everything you see Ukraine doing and the West telling Ukraine to do, none of it is about winning. It's all about creating a bloodbath, creating a quagmire, and sacrificing that country in furtherance of the real ends, which are, regime change in Russia and balkanization of that country. So there's no hope of it's not a strategy of victory and saving the government by releasing all the prisoners from the jails and handing them AK-47s or handing civilians AK-47s. That's not gonna be successful at all, and they know it. What it is gonna do is create a bloodbath and a quagmire, which again, that's the strategy of the West. And a long time ago, they've decided, hey, this is untenable. We are just going to, sacrifice Ukraine, and we are going to wring as much propaganda value out of it in our war against Russia that's possible. So that's what they're engaged in, and it's tough because Putin was definitely, forced into doing what he's doing, and so it's up in the air, how it's going to play out. Best case scenario, Putin can stabilize things. He can get, the population under control, the gangs, the neo-Nazis under control, and he can bring stability and, prosperity to that country. But again, Putin is interested in doing that. The West is interested in destroying Russia, and they're happy to destroy Ukraine on their way to destroying Russia. And that's the main battle right now.
CIA admitted training the Nazis.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry. My wife was reminding me of something. There was a photograph of among others of handing out these ARs, and there were three young women, probably in their early 20s, and one of them had the gun barrel pointed at her face, and the other two were kind of smiling and laughing. And what would happen if they're carrying those guns and they walk around a corner and they run into a platoon of Russian regulars and they're carrying these guns? There's a chance they're going to be shot.
Yeah,
that's so cynical. But then the West will use that as propaganda. Look, they how brutal the Russians are. They shot these young women, blah blah blah, and no regard for the fact that they got these ARs from the United States or from one of their allies, and they gave them to these people that don't know what they're doing. So that kind of cynicism, that kind of cold-hearted murder that the United States perpetrates everywhere is it's pretty damn disgusing. I'd like to take. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, they would even contrive a situation. They would even arm women and send them out specifically to be killed with the cameras rolling. That's how cynical the West is. Yes. So you didn't go quite far enough with your analogy, but you're exactly right.
But let me say that Bill Hicks has a routine. He died years ago. Wonderful comedian. One of his routines is like he mimics a Western show where the villain calls out like the farmer and challenges him to a gunfight, and the farmer doesn't want to pick up the gun, and so Jack Palance is the actor, and so the villain's going, pick up the gun. I don't want to pick up the gun. I don't want to pick up the gun. I don't want to pick up the gun. So finally, the farmer picks up the gun. Of course, he's shot by the villain, and the villain goes, he had a gun. So it was like, it's perfect, you know. Bill Hicks, genius comic. I recommend him for everybody. He died too young. One of the things I want to talk about also is the racism toward non-whites in Ukraine and people trying to flee Poland. There are 30,000 African students in Ukraine, and they've had a hell of a time getting out of Ukraine. They feel like they don't have a dog in this fight. For Christ, they don't. But because especially Poland is, although I've heard conflicting things. I've heard that the Ukrainians are preventing them from leaving, and the Poles are accepting them, and the Poles who are stone cold anti-Semites, of course, are preventing them from leaving. But anyway, they're being treated differently than the white people are being treated, and I think that's also telling on the Nazi front. I think that also is an expression of what's going on with the whole context of right thinking that's actually sweeping all of Europe now with its anti-immigration and all of that. But I recently, actually just 2 days ago, picked up Doug Valentine's book. It's called "The CIA as Organized Crime." Very apt. How illegal operations corrupt America and the world. And this book was published in 2015, but he has a chapter on Ukraine, and it bears a little me reading a couple of paragraphs. This is in the form of an interview, and a man named Dawson begins this with, "We saw in Cuba, for example, the CIA actually hired out Meyer Lansky and the mafia to do its dirty work. Then we see the Ukrainian government hiring out a bunch of neo-Nazis." Yeah, well, it's pretty accurate. Valentine responds, "As usual, I was taking the long road to get to my point. But yes, the CIA has been operating with Ukrainian exiles since the end of World War II, when they hired Reinhard Gehlen. Gehlen had been the chief anti-Soviet spy for the German army. U.S. Army intelligence hired Gehlen in 1945, but as soon as the CIA was formed, it grabbed him and put him in charge of Eastern Europe. The CIA used this former Nazi to reactivate spy networks he had in Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, all the Eastern European countries. And these old Nazi spies and saboteurs went to work for the CIA. So behind all of these anti-Semite racists is the Central Intelligence Agency. So when I hear people go on about how Zelensky do it, he lost relative to this World War II, it doesn't matter to the CIA that happened. Operation Paperclip, they brought hundreds of Nazis over here. I had an interesting experience with the organization of Ukrainian nationalists down on our mall in Washington, D.C. I was down there filming the AIDS quilt with a friend and my wife. She thinks I'm a hero because I got shoved around and sort of defended her. But anyway, I'm no hero. But I saw this group of people, and I took my camera over there. I had a video camera at the top. We had 3 of them, actually. We're doing this TV show. And I took the camera over there, and I started filming these guys standing on a podium giving the fucking Nazi salute, the Heil Hitler salute. And as soon as they saw my camera, they started to jostle me and try to grab the camera out of my hands. So I'm no fool. I ran away. So, and then, and rapidly crossed the street. And they followed us. They tried to follow us home. But I used some subterfuge and we got away from them. But anyway, that was my experience back in the 1980s when most of these people who are trying to say, yeah, you're full of shit, weren't even born. They were still shitting in their nappies. And so these guys have been around, and you could bet your bottom dollar the OUN, that organization, was based in upstate New York. And you know who they helped get elected very fiercely? Ronald Reagan. They were behind Ronald Reagan. You want to talk about Donald Trump and his connections to right-wing people? You should go back to Ronald Reagan and see his connections to the right wing. So anyway, I want to stress how far this Nazism and how deep it goes back and how deeply it's embedded in the U.S. foreign policy establishment. They love their Nazis. They Werner von Braun, intercontinental ballistic missiles. They love their Nazis. Let's not make any mistakes about this. They're in bed with Nazis. The U.S. intelligence establishment is in bed with Nazis. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, they want to paint Ukraine like it's some kind of liberal democracy where it's everybody has the culture. It's no different than San Francisco. No racism, and that's totally false. So you pointed out some of the black, the anti-black racism. So we've seen that in a couple of ways. So there's a lot of footage about black people not being allowed on the trains to leave Kiev and go to Poland. So there's a lot of social media and videos regarding that the media completely censors. And the other way in which their racism is manifest is in the coverage of the crisis. And there's video clips where the reporters are stressing these aren't like Syrian refugees. These aren't like Middle Eastern refugees. These are white Christian refugees. They're prosperous. And just that whole approach to white people are way more important than black people or refugees from the Middle East don't have as much value as white prosperous middle class refugees from Ukraine. It's really despicable. And so that's definitely an element to the propaganda war, which people ought to be able to perceive and ought to give them an inclination about what's really going on and the forces that are on which side.
I want to point out that anecdotally, that even some of these reporters have made these ridiculous comments.
Yeah.
But this is institutionalized Nazism, not in the Ukraine, in the United States. So if you're supporting the U.S. line in this, you are supporting institutional Nazism, which de facto makes you a racist. It makes you an anti-Semite. So when people go to me, oh, you're a Putin lover. Well, I go, well, you're a Nazi lover. And they don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about at that deep level. I'm not talking about it just with the Ukrainians. Let me just do a little more from this. This is Doug Valentine writes brilliant books. And this is the third or fourth one of his I'm reading, engaging. Valentine says, all of this is illegal. There's a context, but this is what the CIA does all around the world. It's doing it in the Ukraine for generations. It has the grandchildren of Nazis on its payroll, an incredible infrastructure of neo-Nazi secret agents who've been battling against Russia for 70 years. The Russians know their names, where they live, where the CIA has its safe houses. But the American public has no clue. Oh, tell me about it, Doug. They think the crisis began today because of the way the news is presented. Mm-hmm. The journalists, their editors, the industry owners, the publishers, which now include Pierre Omidyar, who is the big eBay founder and has the Intercept, which you have to always take with a grain of salt, don't want you to know about all the illegal activities the CIA is involved in on their behalf. So the owners of the New York Times and the Washington Post, both rags, who won't let me post anymore, hire editors who will direct reporters in such a way that they never report on this, what the CIA is doing. And so what's interesting to me is the statement, it has the grandchildren of Nazis on its payroll. They're still banking Nazis in Ukraine and have been all along.
Well, I'm very happy Doug's saying that Russia knows who they are, knows where they are. That makes me feel good. And hopefully, you know, Russia's going to be able to take care of them. Canada, too, is, you know, Chrystia Freelander, what was her name? She used to be on CNN. She used to be a correspondent on CNN. Her grandfather was, you know, with Stepan Bandera during World War II. But there's a huge connection between Ukrainian nationalism and Canada as well. So Canada's another hotbed. And I mean, Canada's just basically a you know, part of the it's a satellite of the U.S. But
yeah, the people that say that the Nazi problem in Ukraine is no worse than the Nazi problem in the United States or the Nazi problem in any other country, they're full of shit. They just don't know what they're talking about. And the other thing that bothers me a lot, and we've talked about this a little bit, is the notion that people like Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, and to a certain extent Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi can't make the distinction between, you know, if you're against the Trudeau government and Friedlander, I think that's her name, his number two. If you're against them, that doesn't mean automatically you can't be associated with a power structure that is also authoritarian that can be described as fascist. And I'm talking about the truckers and their Nazi insignia and their Confederate flags. And of course, the people that are funding them, who are all very wealthy, basically libertarian types, Mercer, Scaife, Sig, Koch, those people. But I'm saying they're just as much, they're just like Nazi light. That's what the truckers are at this point, Nazi light. But there's nothing to prevent them from down the road becoming de facto goose-stepping, Heil Hitlering Nazis, and many of them have already thrown up the Heil Hitler. So I think that Dore and Blumenthal, you know, I really respect Blumenthal's reporting, are really off base all that, and they're going to get caught out, and when the violence starts here, and it's going to be a kind of Nazi violence that they don't seem to be able to suss out somehow, because they think that these guys are coming, the truckers are coming for COVID. Well, they're not coming for COVID. They couldn't give a rat's rectum about COVID. Now, some of their motives for coming are just so they can feel as though they share in the power somehow, that they're out in front of the cameras, that they're being talked to, they're being recognized, and that's true. They haven't been recognized, but they haven't been recognized for all the right reasons, because number one, they're ignorant. They don't know shit from Shinola. And number two, they're racist and they're bigots and they're anti-Semites. So that's a sidebar.
These people left without taking the blacks, man. None of the blacks, man.
So this looks like some of the video about, you know, discrimination against the minorities trying to leave. That's what it looks like they're showing on the screen there.
There has been a lot of segregation in that sense, and then amongst the communities trying to flee Ukraine, there's been a lot of violence.
I think if they stop, we can get back in. Here's
скажу, хто я. Привет.
So, yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit, I mean, about, you know, the West's embrace of Nazis. And I really think that, you know, the original Nazis in Germany, you know, were basically put and propped up to destroy the Soviet Union. And so the original Nazis were a creation of the Western capitalist class. And immediately when World War II was over, even before that, the West switched sides. They started supporting Nazis against the communists in Greece. They started supporting the Imperial Japanese in China against the Chinese Communist Party. So essentially, they were forced into, and it wasn't even until it was clear that the Soviet Union was not going to be destroyed by the Nazi invasion. And that's when the West decided, okay, we will now join the winning side and we'll make the Nazis our enemy. But the reason for that was because they knew that the Soviet Union was going to be marching into Europe, and the West wanted to secure its sphere of influence from the communists in the Soviet Union. So that was the impetus behind finally joining the war, behind finally launching D-Day, in France. It wasn't to defeat the Nazis. It was to protect Europe from having a bigger communist sphere of influence. And immediately when the World War II was over, the U.S., switched sides. They took all the Nazis in. They, Operation Paperclip, like you said. And they launched their Cold War against the Soviet Union, which of course went on for many decades. But Nazism is a creation of the West. It's what happens when the West is threatened by socialism. Then they empower the fascists and the fascist elements. When they're secure and there's peace and prosperity, they don't need to have fascists in charge, and they can even pretend to, oppose Nazism and oppose fascism. But the minute they're threatened, and they feel that they're under threat, they mobilize their Nazis and they unleash them. So, to me, liberalism and Nazism are the same thing. They manifest themselves at different times under different conditions. But there's really no difference, in my opinion. But
that's a great insight.
Yeah. That's
a great insight.
So yeah, you're not going to get any argument from me. The nexus between the West and Nazis. It's total. It's complete. They're one and the same, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Italy too was saturated with Gelli and P2 and Gladio, and the CIA was intimately involved in all those bombings. They killed Aldo Moro and blamed it on the Red Brigades. It turned out to be Gladio and the CIA that murdered Aldo Moro. So it's just disgusting. They have no regard for people at all. They're just psychopaths. But I think we're about ready to wrap it up. We could go on. I could go on for another 10 hours, but I think we're going to have to wrap it up now. And we'll come back to it next week, I'm sure, because there's more to say. There's just so much more to say. And I want to thank anybody watching for doing that, for being interested in a different point of view. Thank you very much.
Thanks.